Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're diving into the work of Professor Jorge Majfud.
Oh, yeah, he's a fascinating guy.
He is. He really is. He's at the Jacksonville University, but you might also know him from,
His prolific writing.
exactly. I
Yeah.
mean, we're talking over 800 articles and books.
Yeah, and they really spark debate, discussions all around the world.
He really gets people thinking. And for this deep dive, we're focusing on how Majfud connects history, economics, and even human behavior.
Yeah, he finds these patterns, these almost like these recurring themes throughout human history.
Right. Like he's got to crack the code.
Exactly. And what we're looking at specifically in this deep dive is how these patterns play out when it comes to power structures and the beliefs that
The beliefs that kind of keep them in place.
yes, exactly, even when they seem totally illogical.
And one of the best examples of this, I think, that Majfud uses is the story of Masa Musa.
Oh, yeah.
Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Masa Musa was this 14th century African king who was, well, he was basically the richest person ever.
I mean, we're talking unimaginable wealth.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And Majfud uses this story to illustrate this point about belief and power.
So picture this. Mansa Musa is setting off on this pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324.
A very important journey.
Huge journey. And he's got this entourage, right? Like a massive entourage.
Massive, yeah.
With him are something like 10,000 servants.
10,000.
10,000 servants. And they're carrying tons, literal tons of gold.
I can't even fathom that much gold.
It's mind-boggling. And so Majfud asks this question, right? Like, if you're one of those servants,
Yeah.
wouldn't you be a little tempted, just a little bit, to maybe grab a handful of gold and make a run for it?
I know it would be. I mean, come on, it's the perfect opportunity, right? No security cameras, no social media.
Right. Exactly. But that's where this idea of the power of belief comes into play.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Those servants didn't revolt. They didn't try to steal the gold because they believed in the system. They believed in the authority of their king.
It's like they were conditioned to accept the existing power structure as just the way things are.
Exactly. They had this deep-rooted belief that this was the natural order of things.
So even though they outnumbered Musa, what, like 1,000 to 1?
Easily.
Their belief in his authority was stronger than any potential for, getting rich themselves.
It's a powerful concept, and Majfud says that this goes way beyond just kings and servants. It applies to all sorts of power dynamics throughout history.
Okay, so give me some examples. Like, how does this play out in other contexts?
Well, we see it in slavery, for example.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
We see it in modern economic systems.
Even today.
Even today. It's this underlying force that shapes how we think about power and authority.
Wow, that's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is, and it's something that Majfud wants us to be aware of.
So speaking of slavery, Majfud makes this, well, it's kind of a shocking claim, right? He says that slaves often participated in upholding the system that oppressed them. How does that even make sense? Like, why would anyone do that?
It's a really complex issue.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around.
But it comes down to a few key factors.
Okay, like what?
Well, fear obviously played a huge role.
Of course. I mean,
Yeah.
The punishments were brutal.
Absolutely. Disobedience was met with incredible violence. But there's also this element of indoctrination, right?
You mean like brainwashing?
In a way, yeah. Like, enslaved people were often denied education, they were isolated from any alternative viewpoints, and they were constantly being told that their position was natural, that it was ordained by God, that this was just how things were supposed to be.
So it's almost like a form of mass hypnosis, right? If you hear something over and over again, especially from a young age, it just becomes your reality.
Precisely. And you have to remember that the master's rhetoric, their justifications for slavery, were often very effective.
They created these narratives that dehumanized the enslaved.
Exactly. They portrayed them as less than human, deserving of their subjugation.
So it's not just physical force that keeps people trapped in these systems. It's also this mental control, this warping of reality.
That's one of Majfud's key insights. Power isn't just about brute force. It's also about controlling the narrative.
It's about shaping the beliefs that underpin society.
Precisely.
Okay, so we've talked about kings and servants, we've talked about masters and slaves, but how does this idea of belief maintaining power structures play out in something like, say, modern economics?
Well, let's think about capitalism for a second.
Okay?
Capitalism is the dominant ideology of our time, right?
Pretty much runs the world.
It does. And it's maintained not just through laws and regulations.
But also through this shared belief in its principles.
Exactly. It's almost like a story that we all buy into, even if we don't consciously realize it.
So we're all kind of subscribing to this idea of capitalism as the best, or maybe even the only viable economic system.
Right, and that story is being reinforced constantly through the media, through our education systems, even in our everyday conversations.
It's like the water we swim in, the air we breathe.
Exactly. It becomes so pervasive that we don't even see it anymore. But it's there, shaping our perceptions of what's possible, what's acceptable.
It's like we're all stuck in this maze where all the paths seem to lead to the same destination.
Yeah, even if that destination isn't actually benefiting everyone equally.
That's a really good analogy.
Mm-hmm.
And what Majfud is saying is that we need to become aware of that maze.
We need to see the invisible walls that are limiting our choices.
Okay, so step one is recognizing the power of the narratives we've been told, right?
Yeah.
But what's next? What does Majfud suggest we actually do about it?
Well, that's a big question. And that's exactly what we'll be tackling in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, I can't wait to hear more.
We're going to delve into Majfud's ideas about historical anomalies.
It's historical anomalies, all right.
We're going to talk about this tension between generosity and selfishness.
Interesting.
And we're going to explore what it might actually take to create a more just and equitable world.
Sounds like a plan. Stay tuned, everyone.
We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. So last time, we were really digging into Professor Majfud's argument about the power of belief and how it maintains these power structures all throughout history. Remember Mansa Musa?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That story about his servants and all that gold really stuck with me. It's like we all have these beliefs about how the world works,
Yeah.
and we don't even question them, but
But what if those beliefs are actually holding us back?
right. Like, what if we're all trapped in this maze of our own making?
That's exactly the kind of critical thinking that Majfud is encouraging, and he takes it a step further, suggesting that our current era, like right now, might actually be what he calls a historical anomaly in terms of the values that we prioritize as a society.
Okay, wait a minute. Historical anomaly. What does he mean by that?
He's basically saying that for most of human history, qualities like generosity, altruism, compassion, those were considered essential for a society to survive. You think of figures like Amos, Jesus, even the inscription on the Statue of Liberty, it all points to this idea that caring for those in need is important, it's crucial.
Right, right. Like, helping each other out wasn't just a nice thing to do. It was seen as, like, essential for the well-being of the entire community.
Exactly. But Majfud argues that somewhere along the line, those values got flipped. Like they got turned upside down. We started celebrating individual ambition and material wealth above all else.
Which, I mean, it makes sense in the context of capitalism, right? It's all about competition, getting ahead, maximizing profit. But you're saying this focus on self-interest is actually like a historical blip.
That's his argument. He's looking at the modern era with the rise of individualism and this idea that pursuing your own self-interest is what drives progress. That's what's best for everyone.
Like, we traded we for me.
Right.
But is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, hasn't individual ambition also led to some incredible innovations and advancements?
That's a really good point, and it's a tension that Majfud acknowledges for sure. But he also argues that this current obsession, with individual success and material wealth, it's not sustainable. He sees it as detrimental to our well-being, both individually and collectively.
So we're back to that maze analogy again, right?
Yeah.
We're all running through this maze of self-interest, thinking we're getting ahead, but maybe we're actually just running in circles.
Exactly. And remember how we talked about the power of belief in maintaining power structures? Well, Majfud argues that the belief in individualism, this belief in the supremacy of self-interest, that's actually what's propping up a lot of the inequalities and injustices that we see in the world today.
Okay, so let's try to tie this back to those historical patterns that Majfud keeps talking about.
Yeah.
We've got the power of belief. We've got this shift from collective good to individual gain. What else is he highlighting?
Another crucial pattern he identifies is this tendency for economic systems to concentrate wealth and power at the top. And we see this throughout history. You look at ancient empires, feudal societies, modern capitalism, it's a constant.
Yeah, the classic rich get richer scenario.
Yeah.
But is that just an unfortunate side effect? Or is there something more deliberate going on?
That's what Majfud wants us to grapple with. He points out that throughout history, those in power have often resisted policies or movements that aim to redistribute wealth or empower those who've been marginalized.
Yeah.
Remember William Jennings Bryan?
Oh, yeah, with his proposal for silver dollar distribution.
Right. He was trying to get money into the hands of everyday people, and the
Yeah.
powers that be shut him down.
They weren't having it.
Not at all. And Majfud argues that this resistance to economic equality, it's not just about greed, it's about maintaining control.
Hmm.
Because when wealth is concentrated at the top, it gives those in power more leverage, right?
Yeah.
They can shape policies, they can influence public opinion, they can maintain the status quo.
So it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle.
Exactly. Concentrated wealth leads to more power, which leads to more concentrated wealth.
And so on and so on.
And that cycle, Majfud argues, is often fueled by that very belief in individualism and self-interest that we were just talking about. It's like a justification for inequality. If everyone's just out for themselves, then it's okay for the rich to hoard their wealth, even at the expense of others.
It's starting to feel like this historical anomaly that we're in isn't just a random blip. It's like a whole system.
Yeah.
Like a web of interconnected beliefs and economic structures that all reinforce each other.
That's a powerful insight. And Majfud's work is really helpful because it helps us to see these connections, these patterns that have played out over centuries. But here's the big question. If we recognize these patterns, if we see the system for what it is, can we actually change it?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I'm guessing Majfud doesn't offer any easy answers.
You're right. He's not a self-help guru with a 5-step plan to fix the world. But he does offer some thought-provoking ideas about what it might take to challenge the status quo and move towards a more just and equitable future. And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the work of Professor Jorge Majfud. And wow, we've covered some pretty intense stuff, Power structures, historical patterns, this whole idea of self-interest versus the collective good.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But that's what makes Majfud's work so compelling, right? He doesn't shy away from the tough questions, the uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
Definitely. And it leaves you thinking.
It does. So the big question now is, where do we go from here? We've identified these patterns, these systems that seem to perpetuate inequality and injustice. But is there any way to actually break free from them?
That's the million-dollar question. And, as you might expect, Majfud doesn't give us any easy answers.
No magic bullet.
No, not really. He's not about those quick fixes or simple solutions. But he does offer some really interesting ideas, some potential paths forward, some ways to start pushing back against the tide.
Okay, so where do we even begin?
Well, according to Majfud, the first step is awareness. We need to recognize the power of the narratives we've been told, the stories that shape our beliefs about ourselves, about each other, about the world.
It's like we've been living in this matrix, this constructed reality, and now we're starting to see the code.
Exactly. We need to develop what he calls a critical consciousness, that willingness to question assumptions, to challenge authority, to look beyond the surface of things.
Now, some of you listening might be thinking, hold on a second. Isn't some level of self-interest natural? Don't we all want to look out for ourselves and the people we love?
Of course.
And that's a fair point. I don't think Majfud is saying we need to become these totally selfless saints.
No, not at all.
It's more about finding a balance, recognizing that our individual well-being is connected to the well-being of everyone else.
Exactly. We're all in this together, whether we like it or not.
So it's not just about changing our own individual beliefs and behaviors.
Right. It's about transforming the systems themselves.
And how do we do that?
Well, that's where collective action comes in. Throughout history, real social progress has rarely been achieved by individuals working alone.
Right.
It takes organized movements, people coming together to demand change.
Like the civil rights movement, the fight for women's suffrage, the labor movement.
Exactly. Those movements were fueled by people recognizing their shared struggles, their common humanity, and demanding a better world.
And we need that today, don't we?
Now more than ever, we need to build bridges across those divides, to find that common ground, to recognize that we're all in this together.
Majfud also talks a lot about the importance of generosity and compassion.
Yeah.
How do those values fit into this bigger picture of social transformation?
Well, if we truly want to create a more just and equitable world, we need to reclaim those values that have been pushed aside, right? We need to recenter our lives around caring for one another, for the well-being of our communities, and for the planet.
It sounds kind of radical in a way, like going against everything our society tells us is important.
It might feel radical, but it's also deeply human. These values of generosity, compassion, solidarity, they're woven into our history, our cultures. They're part of what makes us human.
So it's not about creating something new, really. It's about remembering who we are, remembering what we're capable of.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that potential for goodness that we all have and using it to build a world that reflects our highest aspirations.
Okay, that's powerful stuff. Professor Majfud has definitely given us a lot to think about. Thanks for guiding us through this deep dive.
It's been my pleasure. And remember, folks, this is just the beginning. Keep thinking about these ideas, talk about them with your friends and family, and most importantly, take action. Because building a better world starts with each one of us.